you think about the strategy, like with the product, services, customers, where the company or the board wants to go. Like how do you combine those things, and maybe starting with how you do your assessments and then create the strategy or help them create the strategy?
Yeah, so I have an assessment on my website where essentially you can go in and you can take, I think it's about 15 questions. It's very quick. And you can sort of look at the core of each of the 4 elements I've been talking about. And one of them is strategy. And so when you think about strategy, another statistic for you, MIT did a study, I think it was back in 2017, where they called it the decay curve of strategy. So at the very, very top of the organization, the C-suite, only 48% of executives around the same board table could narrate the strategy similar to the person sitting next to them. And when you get down further and further and further in the organization, it drops to less than 10%. And so strategy is all about setting the direction, making choices. And I happen to use playing to win, which is the way we were taught to develop strategy at Procter & Gamble. It was co-written by A.G. Lafley, who is the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. I don't know if they still do, but they give you the book on your desk on your first day at work at P&G. And it's just a cascading guide around different choices that you need to make to set a strategy. And I think it is very, very important to complete those 7 cascade of choices and get to a clear strategy of what you are and what you aren't. But something that I think people miss and often overlook is that you need to then codify that strategy in a repeatable phrase that you can repeat over and over and over again to avoid that 90% drop off in people that understand your strategy. So it's not just about setting this beautiful strategy, but it's about being able to distill it down and having everyone on your team explain it in a sentence or 2. And I think people so often forget that. They'll spend days and days on a strategy setting session and they'll have the most beautiful deck you've ever seen. And then 2 days later, you'll walk out and ask someone in the session, so what's your strategy? And they won't be able to answer. And so I think strategy is all about choices. But once you get the choices down, you have to find a way to get your organization to buy in, believe, and be able to sort of repeat and recite and back it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fearless Founders. We love our guests, and today we love Brea Page. Brea is from Colorado. I almost said Canada. I've been watching too much World Cup. And she is a dear new friend and has a beautiful background. She currently is the president of her own consulting company that helps particularly fast growth businesses accelerate and get to their goals with her operating systems, and provides a level of structure that everyone needs. Brea also has spent many, many years at P&G with all of the major brands, million-dollar brands, launching them, and has also spent 7-8 years at Google. So she is a very seasoned business lady, expert, professional, and we can't wait to get into some conversations with all of these founders and startup subscribers and listeners who are with their clenched fingers trying to figure out, can I make it? Can I make it? Brea, do you think these businesses can make it?
Yes.
What do you think?
Of course they can. Yeah.
Of course they can.
Yes.
And I feel the same. And we want to support them. And we're very happy.
Yeah, if you have questions, we've got great people here to ask for help. So of course they can.
Absolutely. And Ike is on his second startup from scratch. So he is absolutely in the loony bin when it comes to pain. He knows how to inflict pain on himself.
Yes, I do.
A true statement. Brea, help us. Just because it's fun, what did Procter & Gamble teach you, and what did Google teach you? Just a couple of things, right? Because we're going to talk about
what you taught them.
Just acronyms, really. That's all I learned there. I feel like they have their own lingo, and you can go and have a conversation with someone at P&G and same at Google, and they wouldn't know what they were talking about either way. But in all reality, and any alumni from either of those two companies are going to get a laugh out of that. But all reality, I think I started my career at Procter & Gamble, and it was honestly such a blessing. I went to school in Ohio, at Miami of Ohio, and I was lucky enough to kind of stay in that Midwestern area and go right into the headquarters of P&G in Cincinnati. And it was just an experience that I really, really treasured. They invest a lot in their new hires. And some of my best friends still to this day are from my new hire class starting at Procter & Gamble. And what I really focused on there was helping a lot of their billion-dollar brands go to market globally. So I had the opportunity to see and experience cultures all over the globe, which was absolutely amazing. And really understand, what makes their market different and what makes their users and their consumer base different, and what different needs they have versus what we might have here in the US. And so I learned a ton about strategy. I learned a ton about go-to-market principles. And it really sort of helped me set up my background in business. A little bit later in my career, I moved into Google. And I kind of, I leveraged obviously the skill set that I built at Procter & Gamble, but it opened me up to a whole different speed of business and pace of how things were run. And Google was a bit more focused on execution and operations, or at least the role I had specifically at Google was more focused there. And so it was sort of a great dovetail to the beginning of my career, focused on strategy and going to market and sort of setting the vision for 1, 3, and 5 years. And then at Google, it was all about bringing that vision to life through, very tight timed operations and execution. So it was a really, really well-rounded experience for me.
It just dawned on me that based on those beautiful experiences, no wonder you are focused on the lower mid-size market businesses where PE firms have a lot of need with all of their portfolio companies. And because most of our readers, and I don't even have the story, tell them what you're doing now based on Google and P&G, what your business is focused on.
Yeah, so I've taken my background at P&G and Google, as well as my master's degree, which is focused on organizational psychology. And I help portfolio company leadership teams in the lower middle market anytime they have stalled execution. And I really help them bring their value creation plan to life that they've hopefully co-created with their private equity firm. A lot of times that's easier said than done. And they just need some help, getting off the ground. And so I tend to see that anytime execution is stalled in one of these portfolio companies, it's typically because of 4 things. One is human capital, team dynamics, and culture, which unfortunately is often overlooked. And it's one of the last things assessed when it probably should be the first. The second thing I see is that their strategy isn't aligned. So you've got a lot of oars in the water, but they are rowing toward different directions. The third thing I tend to see is that they don't have clear goals and objectives set toward that strategy. So people, again, are doing a lot of day-to-day work, but is it really laddering up to what is going to help grow your EBITDA and help you get the exit that you want to achieve? And then the fourth thing I tend to see is there are some questions around accountability and roles and responsibility within the lower levels of the organization as the organization grows and tends to scale, gets ready to scale. I think there's a lot of questions on am I supposed to do this, or are you doing this? And do I need your permission to do this, or do I need their permission to do this? And it really starts to slow and stall execution. So with Keep 75, that's what I come in to do. I named my company because 75% of the value in PE deals now come through operations and operational improvement. It used to be all about finance and all about cheap debt, but that's just not the state of the economy that we have today. And so we really need to focus on tightening and sharpening the operations within these companies that they invest in.
Ike, what do you think?
Amazing. I'm so glad you have this formula that you developed already. Can you dig into those a little bit? I'm particularly interested in the first aspect of the human capital and also the strategy. Like how do you do that with the customers in mind, with the pain points?
Yeah.
the customers might.
Yeah, happy to talk about it. So I do have a formula and I call it CORE, KOR, which is the Keep 75 operating rhythm. And I essentially assess all of those 4 areas when I come in. And one of the things that I look for when I'm kind of evaluating human capital is understanding the general psychological safety within the organization. And a lot of, in corporate America, Google specifically, and I'm sure at Procter & Gamble now, psychological safety is a term that's used day to day, and everyone understands and knows what it means. And essentially, for anyone out there that's listening that doesn't, it essentially just means that you feel safe enough to speak up in the workplace. You feel safe enough to disagree with your coworkers or with your boss. It's a concept that's covered quite a bit in corporate America, but in the lower middle market, many people haven't been exposed to this concept. And this feeling of safety and feeling like I can speak out and that I can trust my teammates to listen to me and allow me to express disagreement or frustrations or whatever it might be. And then we can come together, decide, and move on is a huge element of what I look for when it comes to assessing human capital within portfolio companies. It's just not something that they've typically been exposed to. And so I kind of like to, talk one-on-one with members of the C-suite or the team that I'm working with just to understand how they feel like their team is doing when it comes to trust and psychological safety.
Can I insert real fast? At the same time, it's amazing how much the senior most titled leader influences the safety culture.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you're talking to a division or you're talking to a marketing department, the CEO or the COO, president, is setting the tone.
They are.
And yet you come in at a certain point, do you get access and say, hey, you're screwing this up? Do you get to do that?
I haven't exactly said those words yet. I do get pretty unfettered access to the CEOs and COOs, and I like to have conversations with them about a word that they probably don't use a lot in business, and that word is vulnerability. And so there's been so much research done that shows the power of a vulnerable leader. You could probably name 5 books, in the next 10 seconds. But people think, I can only imagine what it must feel like to prepare yourself for institutional investment and how unvulnerable you have to be. You have to be absolutely prepared for every single question that they ask you and show no weakness, right? And then, however, to lead this organization through this massive, massive change, you really have to put on a different hat. And so I like to talk to them a lot about being vulnerable with their team, not in a way that necessarily means you have to break down crying in front of them or anything like that, but being able to sort of admit and fail fast and move on from the mistakes that you've made and be open and vulnerable with your team. And you send these signals out to them that eventually they will start to send back to you. And what you build as a team is a realm of safety. So you're sending a signal out that's saying, I'm being vulnerable with you. Do you receive it? And hopefully over time, maybe not initially, but over time, your teammate will receive it and they'll send a signal back. And that is when those relationships really start to form. And that's when, vulnerable might sound like a soft skill or I hate that word or that phrase, but it might sound that way. But what it really allows and what it really starts to build is this trust. So you can openly disagree, argue even, have, very hard conversations with other people within your leadership team because you expose vulnerability, because you built that trust.
That's beautiful. I just had to quickly look at the phone because I needed to make sure I got the right name. Dr. Tim Clark wrote the book, 4 Stages of Psychological Safety, and everything you're saying, you nailed it, Brea. And I love his definition of psychological safety. He says psychological safety is achieved when you have a culture of rewarded vulnerability.
Yeah.
That's so short and simple, right?
Exactly. So it's interesting you brought up that book. Another book that I love, I have read it probably 100 times, is Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. And he talks a lot about the value of vulnerability. And he cites a lot of, vulnerability and psychological safety. And he cites so many different organizations in his book. And I would encourage any of the founders listening to read this book and think about, he cites the Navy SEALs as one of the most vulnerable organizations that exists today, because they do these after action reviews and talk about when they made mistakes during a mission or during a task that they were given to do. And so when you think about vulnerability, I encourage founders to reframe it as strength and not a soft skill, because what it ultimately leads to is such a higher performing team, because you were able to open up, admit some sort of fault or failure, receive that same admission back, trust was built, and then you're taking off like a rocket. And so I just think that is one of the things I talk to the C-suite members and the CEOs and COOs that I work with about. And it doesn't always go over well. I work in the lower middle market, so it doesn't always go over well. But I keep hammering and I keep, talking about the benefit and give some of the examples like the one I just gave where, if you think that vulnerability is only for a certain group of people, go ahead and tell so-and-so in the Navy SEALs that vulnerability isn't working. I invite you. So
Yes.
I'm trying to give our founders some patterns to recognize it. Like, is this a correct statement where like the founders sometimes cannot control their emotions and fear comes in and they just burst without thinking through it, they don't take a breath before respond, they just like react. And also something else comes to my mind where you can make mistakes and talk about, because you're also a human being, you just talk about those and then how you move on those and you share those experiences. But when you're a leader, if you can't differentiate between like when somebody has duties to do like their KPIs or things that they need to achieve, that's like not being able to separate those conversations. Like this is my family, I'm gonna keep being vulnerable and tell about all my feelings, but when the time comes to keep them accountable, I won't be able to do that. Those type of psychological minds maybe is preventing them being practices. Is that like, am I on the right track with this? Like,
yeah. Let me give you, I think so. Let me give you an example of what I think you're saying is, when you think about vulnerability, you think about it in this like emotional sense, but in the meantime, you need to be running this business and keeping people on track, and they cannot see you as a leader who shows weakness, which I agree with. Well, in a certain sense, I don't think it's bad to show weakness, but I understand what you're trying to say is like they're the person that is keeping everyone accountable. You're accountable to that person. So what I'm suggesting is that a vulnerable team, or let's call it a psychologically safe team, might even be a better phrase. Someone would come in and say, my KPI is in the red and I'm being blocked by this and I need your help. And a not psychologically safe team, or a team that hasn't shared vulnerability, would come in and say, yeah, we're yellow trending green. Yeah, we're going to get there. We're going to be just fine. And ultimately, what ends up happening is that second example fails because they were not safe enough to come in and be vulnerable in front of that person that they have to be accountable to. So I think it's less about emotion and more about, am I safe? Am I safe to say this? And I worked with a VP at Google, and he once said, if you come in and show me an all green scorecard, I'll tell you you're lying to me. Because they said there's always problems. There's always things that are, that have happened that are going to put you in the red or in the yellow. And that's what I'm here for. That's what I want to talk about. So that's the type of vulnerability that you really want to encourage in a psychologically safe environment. And that's the kind of conversations that I have when it comes to the human equity side, the human capital side.
Yeah, it's almost like I've learned this through my mistakes, but practicing it, saying something along the line, you just screwed up royally. That's fine. You were trying. You were trying to bust through an experiment somewhere, and if the breakthrough happened, we would have made some big inroads. You would have deviated us from the norm because you wanted to innovate. I applaud you. Keep trying. It's okay. Let's go. Right? That's the supportive kind of lingo that a leader can provide and cover fire for the employees and the executives. That makes them feel like, hey, all right, let's go create, let's go build, right? Rather than being shamed or slammed.
Yeah, and you probably both know this, and many of your listeners do, so I'll make the anecdote quick, but the theory of psychological safety and the vulnerability required to be in a psychologically safe team came from this experiment that Amy Edmondson was running, where she was trying to understand, I'm don't quote me on all the details, but from my memory serves, she was doing an experiment in a hospital where she was looking at a surgery team and trying to understand which surgery team made more mistakes. And what she ultimately found out was that one surgery team was reporting all of the mistakes that they were making, and one surgery team wasn't. And when you looked at their patient satisfaction scores, the team with more mistakes had 3-4x higher satisfaction scores, team with fewer mistakes. And the reason was because it wasn't because this team was making fewer mistakes. It's because they weren't reporting them, because they didn't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. So they weren't reporting their mistakes, they weren't getting better, and they weren't satisfying their patients. Where the team of surgeons and nurses that were feeling vulnerable and psychologically safe enough to report their mistakes, you should have done this better, you could have helped me do this better, exactly to your example, they were getting, patient satisfaction scores off the chart. So that's the type of, just permission that you're giving each other to have the difficult conversations by being vulnerable and by establishing psychological safety with your leads.
Yep,
You had a question around strategy, Ike?
Yes, I think our founders would enjoy how you think about the strategy, like with the product, services, customers, where the company or the board wants to go. Like how do you combine those things, and maybe starting with how you do your assessments and then create the strategy or help them create the strategy?
Yeah, so I have an assessment on my website where essentially you can go in and you can take, I think it's about 15 questions. It's very quick. And you can sort of look at the core of each of the 4 elements I've been talking about. And one of them is strategy. And so when you think about strategy, another statistic for you, MIT did a study, I think it was back in 2017, where they called it the decay curve of strategy. So at the very, very top of the organization, the C-suite, only 48% of executives around the same board table could narrate the strategy similar to the person sitting next to them. And when you get down further and further and further in the organization, it drops to less than 10%. And so strategy is all about setting the direction, making choices. And I happen to use playing to win, which is the way we were taught to develop strategy at Procter & Gamble. It was co-written by A.G. Lafley, who is the former CEO of Procter & Gamble. I don't know if they still do, but they give you the book on your desk on your first day at work at P&G. And it's just a cascading guide around different choices that you need to make to set a strategy. And I think it is very, very important to complete those 7 cascade of choices and get to a clear strategy of what you are and what you aren't. But something that I think people miss and often overlook is that you need to then codify that strategy in a repeatable phrase that you can repeat over and over and over again to avoid that 90% drop off in people that understand your strategy. So it's not just about setting this beautiful strategy, but it's about being able to distill it down and having everyone on your team explain it in a sentence or 2. And I think people so often forget that. They'll spend days and days on a strategy setting session and they'll have the most beautiful deck you've ever seen. And then 2 days later, you'll walk out and ask someone in the session, so what's your strategy? And they won't be able to answer. And so I think strategy is all about choices, but once you get the choices down, you have to find a way to get your organization to buy in, believe, and be able to sort of repeat and recite and back it.
Great, huh? Ike?
Yes, I mean, I remember in my previous startups, we had these strategy sessions, and then the rabbit holes we would go into, like, okay, here's the strategy, and then let's review how we're gonna do this, and department by department, the detail by department, the go-to-market strategy, this and that. So like the meeting would just blown up, like nobody can fit that much information into your brain. And also there's always 1 or 2 senior leader says, I don't buy this, but I will silently accept it. Like those sleeper cells that their department just like, they're not going to get the strategy at all, or they're going to do whatever they think they're the best to do. I think distilling into a short version of it that you can repeat, because as a CEO, sometimes your job is to just go repeat everywhere. Like with your, like, let's skip your managers and then all that stuff. but to be able to create a mechanism to distill this information is very powerful, I think.
So I think something else you said was brilliant, and it kind of goes back to the point I was just making. My core process follows a pattern for the reason you just said. So I start out with the team culture and the human capital piece. And what you just said, Ike, was you got people that sit in the boardroom and they just shake their head, even though they don't really believe it. And that is my point, right? It's like you have to start with making sure that people won't just shake their heads. You have to start with making sure people feel like they can have those difficult conversations. So that's why I start core with the team culture piece of it. And then we go into strategy, which again, strategy isn't simple, but it can be defined simply as a set of choices. And once you make a set of choices, the next phase is that we go into creating objectives against our strategy and against our strategic pillar or strategic pillars. And when you create those objectives, you then leverage those objectives throughout all of your management cadence for the rest of the month, quarter, half year, and year. And so that strategy is repeated and it's showing up and it's getting hopefully, completely memorized by everyone in the organization, and all of their work is lining up to it. So there's a method to my madness when it comes to around the circle, and why I sort of plot things out that way.
So can I ask one more, one level down? I'm on double click. I'm trying to help our founders because I've been in this situation and I have scars from it. So I'm trying to learn. In a startup, you don't have all the information sometimes. Like you have to have maybe 70% of the information, and there's no way to get to 100% without spending $1 million, and nobody has it. So in the boardroom, even though you have these discussions, even arguments like we can't do this, we do this, but nobody has the full data. But at the end, you have to make a decision to move forward. Otherwise, you'll end up with no decision, no strategy. Right? So what are your recommendations in that situation? Because you want to be able to discuss, hey, if we do this, here are the risks for this. We should prepare for this and all that. But at the end, everybody has to get on board with the strategy, even though those risks are noted, right?
Yeah. So are you asking when you have a disagreement, how do you break the tie?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think ultimately it comes down to the most senior person in the room, and it comes down to that person sort of asserting leadership. But I think through productive conversations over a day or 2 days around strategy, your ultimate goal is to answer the question, where to play, and in that is where not to play, and then how to win. So where am I going to play, and what are the capabilities that I'm going to use to win in that arena that I've defined? And hopefully through that conversation, things become more objective and less subjective. Yes. And I think just continuing to question and break it down to, if this is where we've defined to play and this is how we're going to win, then why do we need to focus on this? What competitive advantage is this going to bring to us? Or why shouldn't we focus on that? What are we missing from that? And so I think just continuing to kind of question and break down those two, where to play and how to win, is something that I'll spend hours on if we have to. And I do think you should spend, a good amount of time setting your strategy, but ultimately, I suppose depending on your leadership style, but it's typically not a democracy. So ultimately the leader does have to make a call. And to your point, you don't have all the data, but you have a good bit. And by the time we get through our strategy working session, you have a pretty good idea of, where you should be headed and what capabilities you need to really win in this area that you've defined.
That's beautiful. That's exactly where I was hoping you would go to, because I didn't want to teach our founders everything has to be democracy. You have to achieve everything consensus. Sometimes the leadership requires you to make the decision and move forward. But I think what you said was, where am I playing and what do I need to do to win? Those are so critical questions to keep everybody in line, even the naysayers, and bring back, instead of just saying no, what is the solution for us to win in this space? I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, and it really helps. Like I mentioned, it tends to turn things into a more objective answer. It tends to kind of work itself out on the slide or on the whiteboard, if you will. But yeah, I mean, part of being a founder is being a leader, right? And it's making those hard decisions. And I think ultimately the best leaders can come back and say when they were right and when they were wrong. And I think when you can kind of own up in your postmortem or after action review or whatever, when you've made a decision that didn't exactly go your way, that's when you start to gain the trust of people, and you can get them in your corner for life.
May I change the topic for just a bit? People are always running with their hair on fire when you start a business, but it really doesn't slow down much. What do you see leaders doing to be able to think clearly when they are so stressed all the time? What have you observed from fitness to diets to mindfulness exercises? Just a completely different topic. What do you see?
I love it. Yeah, I think the leaders that I see that are most successful at having, I hate to use the phrase work-life balance, but to kind of have to be more centered at work, just really have habits that they stick to and that they make them sort of non-negotiable habits. I wasn't paid to say this, but I also think it helps to have an executive coach when people are going through these different transitions. I really think that leadership can be very lonely, and you need people to help hold you accountable to those habits. And also you need people to sort of let you know when you're starting to slip from those habits. And so I have a couple habits that I try and put in place, and I write 3 things down every single day that I try and get done. And I have a habit where if I don't get them done by a certain time at night, that's it. That's my family time after night. And so I just have to go to bed with that extra thing on my plate ready for tomorrow. And guess what? I'm still doing fine after 20 some years at work with leaving a few items on the to-do list in the evening. But I do just think like creating habits, boundaries. I recently told a friend a story. We recently enrolled our kids in a different school that is a wonderful school, but unfortunately it's about 30 minutes away from our house. And my husband and I have split up. He takes them in the morning and I bring them home at night. And one of the things I was really worried about was how it was going to interrupt my work schedule. And I realized, my children are obviously more important to me than my work schedule. And so I need to make a habit and set a boundary of blocking off 2:30 to 4:30, which is a gasp because it is in the middle of the working day. And I thought to myself, it's going to plummet from here. Like I'm going to miss all these meetings and all these calls and I'm never going to get this time back. But that's a habit I had to set. And I barely noticed that I was missing that time in the middle of the day because I set that habit. And then I was able to sort of bring my work schedule around to meet the needs of my family, to make sure that I put them first. So I think just being, true to yourself and true to your needs, setting those habits, seeking out advice and advisors are things that I would recommend to leaders. Do what you need to do for yourself and your family first.
I love this. This is so important.
Don't get me wrong. There certainly were days when I had to take a call in the car, and I don't want to make it sound like this rainbow picture of, I just cruise control for 2 hours a day every day. Like there were things that had to take place, but more often than not, I was able to maintain that schedule.
There is, because I've been watching the World Cup like crazy. I'm loving it. There's a beautiful, very talented 23-year-old player who told his team, and they're playing right now, that if my wife goes into labor,
I heard about this.
First baby, I am leaving the match. I am leaving the tournament. The uproar that the coach and the teammates made about his decision, listen to this, was swamped and overwhelmed by the fans who supported him. Daku, go home. You are the best.
Yeah.
It's all over social media, how much support he got for prioritizing his very first baby, that he wanted to be home for that.
And it's crazy that it's even like a subject, but I do think, right? But I do think ultimately you have to put those boundaries in place. And, I can imagine as a founder, you're on hustle mode 24/7. And, this is no secret, but ultimately that will lead to burning out. And A lot of us have to burn out before we put the habits in place, and that's okay. That's what your support system is there for, and you'll come back from it. But yeah, once you have experienced that, you start to be a little bit more protective of your time and your well-being.
Thank you for supporting what I've always believed in. And I try to live it myself with my non-negotiable time. Change of topic, because it's so fun. We have lots of listeners who have 1, 2, maybe 3 leaders in their small business growing to a bigger size, hopefully. When they get to a leadership team of 7, 8, 9, you see that a lot more because you're working in the group that's more established. What kind of advice, what kind of lessons are you seeing when the leadership teams go from 2 to say 7?
Yeah.
What should they be prepared to anticipate and do better for that next stage?
Yeah, I think there's 3 things that I tend to see. And the first one is going to sound very repetitive, but you are probably very close with employee 1 and employee 2. And they probably have that vulnerability and the psychological safety and everything they need to have in place. And then as 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 15 come in, you can imagine the circle widens. And oftentimes we sort of take our eye off of that team culture. Trust is the main underlying foundation. And so I think it's important to return to those principles that we spent the earlier part of the hour talking about and make sure that you have the same level of trust, vulnerability, and psychological safety with your 15th leadership team member as you do with your second. Because again, it will allow those difficult conversations. It'll help you be more creative in your brainstorming and innovation days, and it will pay itself off exponentially. So always going back to that foundation. The other 2 things that I tend to see when groups get bigger are issues with roles and responsibility. So, oh, you're doing that? I thought I was doing that. And it's unclear who is supposed to be in what lane and what it means to lead versus what it means to collaborate, which kind of leads into my third thing, which is accountability. So you have a team of 4 to 15 people. Who is really accountable for what? You might have 5 people of those 15 working on something, but who is the person that I need to go to when the buck stops? Like how do I really hold people accountable? So this whole idea of roles and responsibility and accountability becomes very important as the team starts to grow from the 2 to 3 people that just did everything, right? And now they're trying to help scale and get the, employees 10 through 15 to take on some of that work. But we have to make sure we do it in an efficient way so that there's not overlap or non purposeful repetition. So those are the 3 things.
Beautiful. We know because we've done it. Just shadow, and you'll figure it out. Look, I'll get to you tomorrow. Right now, I got to put out this fire, and then later on, these people are not pulling their weight.
Yeah.
They're not even accountable. They have no clue where the line of demarcation is because there were no boundaries created for handoffs. The roles, and so everybody starts pointing fingers when in fact it's a systemic issue.
It is, yeah.
To be overflowing because of, I'm sorry, I don't have time to teach you. I don't have time to define it, right?
Yeah.
I thought you already knew how to do the job. That's why you got hired.
Yeah. It is a systemic issue, and I think roles and responsibility are one thing, but then accountability is a whole different thing because you kind of have 2 types of people. You have the types of people that think, what's that phrase? Ask for permission later or
ask for forgiveness.
Yes. Ask for forgiveness and not permission. You have asked for permission later. I nailed it. Those types of people that just sort of run and they go and they do the thing and they take accountability that they really don't have the right to take, and they make decisions that they shouldn't be taking, and that's very dangerous. Then you have the other type of people that are like, oh, I need to ask permission to do everything, and I have to ask the founder or the CEO to get a permission to do all of these things, and they don't make any progress. And so there's 2 very dangerous things that can happen with responsibility and accountability. And And again, it takes, hours, days, if not hours, to sort of set some of these frameworks in place that help save you time and money in the end, for sure, when it comes to scaling out your team.
Yeah, this brings like two things to my mind. One is when you hire A players, normally you don't have to do all the stuff. So, but when you're growing founder, sometimes you have to get talent to grow with you. So you're going to have to be the coach for those people as a founder. The other part, I remember when you were talking about this, it might be easier to keep somebody accountable at a function level. Like CFO, maybe you're going to keep accountable for all the financial decisions and the well-being capital part of the business and marketing and sales. But when the company starts building cross-functional teams to accomplish something, tiger teams or whatever XYZ team that you build, it is very important that you pick somebody, or they need to pick somebody to be accountable, just because they're all representing their own departments to get this thing accomplished. Like, would you agree with that? Like, is that how you would do it, or do you have other recommendations?
Yes, I couldn't have said it better myself. That is when I see the biggest execution stall, is when initiatives move from single function complexity into cross-functional complexity. And then it becomes just a battle. Who's in charge, who's accountable, who's doing what. And in bigger, corporations, Google or Procter, we used a RACI model or a RAPID model or a DACI model. You can look all these up, and it's just a really nice, easy way to sort of set the roles and responsibilities for who's accountable for doing what in the organization. And I remember way back in P&G, when we had to get ink signatures on pieces of paper to do projects, we did write a document before each of our projects that talked about the roles and responsibilities that each of our multifunctional players were going to have, because of course everything at Procter & Gamble is a giant multifunctional exercise, as it should be. And sometimes I do think back to those days where you had to go around and get everyone's signature to say, like, this is what I'm going to do. And of course, a founder in a tech-based startup would laugh at that now, because there's no time for that. And I don't know if people even use pens anymore.
Well, we do it in Slack. We do it in Slack.
There you go. Yeah.
We assign emojis to those people that are.
You just need a thumbs up emoji, right? Like Ike's Finance, thumbs up, whatever it is. But it could take 10 minutes, and I think that it's really, really important. But cross-functional initiatives is when it really starts to show and really starts to rear its head when it comes to roles and responsibility and accountability disagreements.
Yeah, and I remember I had a few superstars in my team. I had cross-functional teams. Superstars would always jump in and then take the leadership position on those teams. But as the founder, CEO, or leader, you have to jump in to control that. If they're the ones only doing it, your team is not growing, right? Yeah, there will be resentment coming in, and those superstars will start complaining about, why am I working with non-superstars? Real quick.
Yeah, and going back to Binoy's question on, well-being and sort of mindfulness, those superstars are going to be the first ones to burn out if they're not given the resources to scale their abilities. And, that's not what we want, right? That's the opposite. We need them to be leading the charge. We need them to be, full of energy and spreading like the good habits and the healthy behavior. So yeah, it's dangerous. And that's one of the reasons why it's sort of the last thing on my core model is that I talk about roles and responsibility and accountability. And people sometimes read it and they're like, oh, well, that seems silly, but it is the biggest execution drift that I see in my experience.
Yeah. And I'm going to punctuate what you just said, Brea, to our listeners. It is a major issue because people are so busy, they never want to, plus it's boring, non-sexy, to take the time aside to sit down and think through everyone's roles, to figure out how they can succeed, how everyone can succeed. It takes time, and everyone's rushing around. Even at the stage you're at, Brea, with bigger companies and organizations, they're still dysfunctional to a certain level, which is why they need you and your expertise to be able to guide them back on the right tracks, right? And so it's just a function of everyone's busy, burning the candle, both ends, whatever. We need to take time and deliberately map out a plan. When you go diving in the ocean, they always say, plan your dive, then dive your plan, right?
Yeah.
That's the way it needs to be, and we don't, because we're always busy. It's always another emergency, some priority. So.
Yeah, I agree. I think also, like, sure, most organizations have dysfunction, but even before you get to this function piece, you don't know what you don't know. So if you've always worked in a certain way at a certain size and you've been very successful, you keep doing it. And you don't realize these little things can really lead you off track. But of everything we talked about today, maybe aside from culture, because that often it can be a bigger issue, although often it is not. Once you sort of get everyone in the same room, they always tend to leave arm in arm. But they're not, year-long processes that you have to implement to make the solution happen. It's hours, days, weeks, months. I mean, they're pretty quick. But to your point, everyone is just so busy that they kind of look past it. And unfortunately, they wait till they start to see failure or drift, and then they come back and put the systems in place. And one of the things I talk a lot about with the firms I work with is, if we put this in place on day one and you repeat this process every single time you close, you're not going to lose the time and money that you have in the past.
Yes, well said. That's very proactive. Brea, one last topic because we're running out of time. I've noticed that in many, many cases, particularly in the way that you interact and help organizations, leaders are selective in their humility. They want to have the help, but not too much. They want to be still seen as sufficiently knowledgeable and wise. And yet, Brea, please help us, right? There's a certain balance that I think, and you could call it vulnerability, but strong leaders need to have the capability to ask for help when needed, to plow through ambiguity when needed, to encourage a vision and a direction and a sense of hope and a why, even if they don't have all the answers. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And today I was reading an article, and I love this definition of leadership that popped up. I'm going to read it to you. This is why I'm bringing this up, because leadership is not a popularity role. Political scientist Ronald Heifetz famously argued that leadership is about disappointing people at a rate they can stand. Right? That's beautiful.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
I
think it can be about disappointing people at a rate they can stand, or said another way, as we kind of like to bring it back to what we talked about in the opening, being honest about your failures, failing fast and moving on. So I think you only disappoint people when you sort of promise them something and then you don't end up delivering it. But if you admit the reasons why you didn't deliver, learn, and then go on to deliver, like the disappointment will come back around. So I think there's so much about, like you said earlier, I'm great at my job and I know what I'm doing and I don't need any help. And I actually really believe that for the most part. I think that there's founders out there and CEOs out there that are obviously far more intelligent than I am and have far more industry expertise than I do. And in no way am I claiming to ever come in and take their job. I'm just offering them 4 simple sessions or principles or thoughts that could make their life easier. And, there are things that they are, again, there's always things that people are better than you at. And I feel like this is just one of those things. So it's not necessarily that they have to worry about being seen as, needy or not having all the skill set. It's just, you're a skier, I'm a snowboarder. Like, let's just teach each other different habits and I'll come in and help you out and do this. And that's one of the things when people ask me, what industries do I tend to work in? I always say for that specific reason is that I'm industry agnostic, because I am not an industry expert in any industry. That's your job as the CEO or the COO. I'm here to coach or guide you through a small period of your career, but I'm not the expert in that area. And that's why I say that industry wise, because I do see that. I do see some people thinking, while I have this all figured out. And I would agree, in many ways you do. And, so folks like myself and yourself can come in and just help you along the way a little bit.
Oh, I would follow you in a heartbeat. Any advice from Brea Page, I will listen. And I owe you lunch when you pop over here on this side of the mountain.
Yes, I can't wait.
It's fabulous, Brea. Where can people learn more about you? What's your URL, your website, your handle?
Yes.
What's there?
Sure. You can go to my website. It's keep75.com, and you can learn all about me and all about our business. And you can look me up on LinkedIn. It's just Brea-Page on LinkedIn.
And it's Brea with a Brea, everyone. So
yes.
Beautiful.
The one day my mom decided to display her creativity was to throw an A on the end of my name. And it has chased me my entire life. So yes, it's Brea.
Oh, you're terrific. Thank you so much. That was delightful. Thank you for the education. We needed that.
Thank you.
It was lovely. I hope you get to come back soon. I have so many more questions, and I think you are a breath of fresh air, because in the AI world, everybody is trying to get the people out. But I think for organizations to perform, we can do it together with people. The human capital is as important as the AI capital. Yeah. And I think that was beautiful. Maybe when you come back for the second time, we can dig into those as well.
Let's do it. I love it. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Brea. Thanks, everyone. Until next time, please share this with everyone. We'll post it soon. Bye-bye.